Be seated. And are there children here today to join me? Aha. We'll all just take a deep breath while we wait for them. Here they come. So today is All Saints' Day. And after communion, we are going to sing one of my all-time favorite hymns, a hymn called I Sing a Song of the Saints of God. And I thought that I would take our time here and explain a little bit of it to you guys so that you can enjoy it more. In the middle of this song, while we're singing about how great the saints are, there are some saints who are mentioned, but they're not mentioned by name. And so we might get more out of it if we know who they are. In one of the verses, it says, one was a doctor, and one was a queen, and one was a shepherdess on the green. The doctor was St. Luke. St. Luke started out his life as a physician and went on to write one of the Gospels. In fact, the Gospel account that I just read a couple of moments ago. He started out healing bodies. He ended his life healing spirits by sharing the good news. The Queen is St. Margaret of Scotland. St. Margaret was married to a king of Scotland named Malcolm, and was the mother of another king named David. And she spent her life trying to make sure that her husband and her son both behaved while they were king and didn't abuse their power. She gave to the poor. She also made sure that people in the church behaved. And the shepherdess on the green is St. Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc was a teenage girl in France, and God appeared to her in a dream and told her that he wanted her to lead the armies of her people against some invaders. Now, Joan had two things going against her. One, she was a girl, and in those days, women were not allowed to be soldiers. And two, she was a kid, and everybody thought she was far too small. And they all thought Joan was crazy. But she didn't listen to them, and she went where God called her. Now, later on in the hymn, we have three more saints. It says, one was a soldier, and one was a priest, and one was slain by a fierce wild beast. The soldier is St. Martin of Tours. St. Martin was a Roman soldier who was unusual in his day, because back then the Roman soldiers were really sort of like street gangs in a large part of Europe. They could go around and shake people down and get what they wanted out of them. And Martin refused to go along with any of that. And when Martin got paid, he would take all of his money and he would give it to the poor. And there's a great story about Martin that one day he was riding along at the end of the army, and he passed by a beggar. Now, we have to know it was snowing and it was really cold, and the beggar didn't have a coat on, and Martin had already given away all of his money. But he stopped and he took off his heavy cape and pulled out his sword and cut his cape in half and gave half the cape to the beggar. And later that night he had a dream, and in the dream he realized that the beggar had been Jesus. And Martin went on to become a bishop in the church. The priest is St. John Donne. He was a priest like me in the Anglican Episcopal tradition. He was also a poet and spent a lot of time writing words that lifted people's hearts up. Some of his words are hymns in our hymnal. And then we get to my favorite one, the one who was slain by a fierce wild beast. Always catches your imagination when you're a kid. That was St. Ignatius of Antioch. He's in there to remind us that sometimes being a Christian is really hard. That other people aren't always going to be happy with us taking the stands that our faith demands. That sometimes they're going to be really, really mean to us. The hymn ends with the words, "The saints of God are just folk like me, and I mean to be one too." It's great for us to remember all of these heroes, people like St. Joan or St. Martin that I've just mentioned, or St. Matthew, the patron saint of our parish, or other saints you might have heard of, like St. Nicholas or St. Francis, or Mary, the mother of Jesus, or St. John the Baptist. These people do have an awful lot to teach us about what it means to be a Christian. But at the end of the day, the work of being a saint isn't something that's just left to them. It's something for folks like you guys and me. Folks for even the littlest among us, or the oldest, or the weakest. Because being a saint is all about giving witness to the God who made us, who loves us, and who sends us out to share that good news with everyone else. Let's go get a stamp. Today is the Feast of All Saints. It would be helpful, of course, if we knew what that word saints really means. It comes from a Latin word, sanctus, that means set apart. Originally, sanctus was a word that was used for boundary lines on maps. Something like a river would be sanctus because it marked a clear line between one person's space and another person's. Over time, that word came to also mean people who were set apart. And that's the meaning it has when we Christians take it up. We think today of saints as being those heroes, the heroes in the song that I was just telling the kids about. But that's not how the word started for us. It started for us as meaning all of us. The way we heard St. Paul use the word in the letter to the Ephesians this morning. Those who are set apart by virtue of their baptism, set apart from the world. It's only later that it comes to take on the meaning that we're more familiar with today. See, our ancestors all thought, and those very first Christians, even St. Paul, we're pretty sure, thought that Jesus was coming back right away. And so the saints were those who had been set apart to be in that kingdom that he was coming back right away to found. But then he didn't come back right away. and some of the saints started to die. And we had to figure out what that meant for us. And we came to affirm that you didn't stop being a saint when you died, that our baptism was something that transcends such simple things as death, that we are in the church all one body across time and space, all of us saints. But then we started to use that word in a more limited sense, first for those who died the death of martyrdom, slain by fierce wild beasts like Ignatius of Antioch. And then when the age of martyrdom came to be mostly past, to include those who had led particularly holy lives, monks or virgins or people like that. And it gets to the point where that's almost exclusively the way we use the word. And there is nothing wrong with looking at the lives of those heroes of the faith. After all, they do have a lot to teach us about what it means to be Christian. And if you've been by my office, you know that I have their pictures all over the walls and am devoted to many of them and their examples. But today I want to go back to that original meaning of saints and recover it for all of us. Because the sainthood of those special heroes is meaningless apart from the common sainthood of our baptism. We are, all of us, still set apart from the world to be examples, and that work can't be left to a few particular heroes. It's something that we all have to take up. Now, I'm afraid that when we start to think this way, what many of us start to do is then to try to see if we can be the holiest among those saints. If it's our job to set up the example, then let's do our best and outdo each other so that people will look at us and say, St. Matthew's church is the church where the saints go. As an antidote to that, though, I want to point out that in our gospel lesson this morning, Jesus has these words to say. Woe to you when all speak well of you. Sainthood is not about other people noticing how holy we are. Sainthood is about pointing the way to Jesus, and then, to borrow words from St. John the Baptist, to decrease so that he might increase. Being a saint is not about us, but about him, and about leading others to him. The next danger of sainthood, of course, besides just getting a big head and trying to let others think well of us, is the danger of then judging others on their sainthood. To worry about whether other people are pointing the way they're supposed to. But sainthood is not about being judge. It's about being witness. The job of judge is already taken, and it is far above the pay grade of anybody in this room. We're simply supposed to be signposts on the way. So what then does it mean to be set apart? If it's not about how holy we might be, if it's not about being the ones who divide the world into those who are saints and those who are not saints, what is it? And for that, we can turn back to the words of Jesus that we heard this morning. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. Turn the other cheek. Offer up your shirt as well as your coat. I dare say that the world is desperately in need of that witness. And we don't have to look far away across the ocean to see how desperate we are for that. We only need to look in our own communities, our own neighborhoods. Look at what this election is doing to us and how the ways of the world are moving into patterns of separation of good guy and bad guy. Look at how we react when the other offends us. And I'm just talking about Christians at this point, and not even worrying about everybody else. The world needs us to be saints. Our communities need us to be saints so that we can teach them that the love of God is bigger than any of the squabbles we might come up with to divide ourselves. I'm not saying that the squabbles are unimportant, but only that they are not the final thing. Come Tuesday, regardless of the results, the world is going to need us to be saints and to show them how to love those with whom we disagree. Even worse, how to love those who will say and do horrible things to us. Jesus calls us apart to be saints, to be witnesses to a love that is so deep and powerful that it went all the way to the cross. A love that was willing to die for people who did not love back. That's what it means to be saints. To give witness to that love, as hard as it is. It's not easy. I know that come Tuesday, and basically every day, I would just as soon in my own life curse those who curse me, and strike those who strike me, and drive out those who don't think the way I think, or who don't live the way I think people ought to live. But it is our calling to aim for the words that Jesus has given us, to aim for that love that helps us to be so much more than we are on our own. This day, this Feast of All Saints, is a celebration of that love. The love that transformed our ancestors and the love that can transform us. And on this day, this feast sends us out into the world as witnesses to that love, so that all will know good news, that our squabbles, that our hatred, that our violence, that our brokenness is not and cannot ever be the last word.